every time you are near.
We did it, guys! Or, you guys did it. This channel has been caught in 4K subscribers. Well, actually it's something more like 4.7K subscribers now, but you get the idea. You guys really wanted me to talk about Swalot.
What?
You have the demand and I have the supply. Swalot Pokedex number 31738A. Swalot is not a fan favorite. In fact, Swalot seems like the complete opposite of a fan favorite. It's a stomach crossed with a grotesque yokai, and that does not sound pleasant. But no matter what people tell you, every Pokemon is someone's favorite. I mean, Swalot's in Pokopia as a moving storage, and it got into the fan game Pokemon Type Wild over Charizard and Pikachu. So what does that tell you?
He should be the next
Face of Nintendo, Super Spike Brothers, Super Smash Spike, Spike Tennis!
I'm hoping you're ready to stomach the raw and delicious history of Swalot in the competitive scene. So we ask, how good was Swalot actually? Shit, I'm gonna get reported. Was Swalot able to win the gourmet race? Or was Swalot's reputation swallowed up by the competition? Let's find out. Swalot is the first Pokemon to not only be as good as Gen 3 Tyranitar, but even upstage it. In my opinion, it is an example of a perfect Pokemon. Yeah, we're not doing this. Swalot in its debut really wasn't all that. I'm sorry if you came into this video thinking I would talk about the super secret niche Swalot has in Gen 3 OU, but Swalot's in PU. NU rejected it, and not the NU with Flygon, Swampert, and Raikou. Nah, the NU tier where Blossom and fucking Chimecho are the top Pokemon. Swalot has the Gen 3 stat spread problem, except it's a mixed wall meant to tank hits on both sides. But Game Freak forgot to put in the sauce, the utility, the offensive prowess, the progress making. Swalot has a surprisingly huge offensive move pool, but even for ADV standards, 73 attack and special attack just wasn't it. Swalot does have a few things going for it. Swalot had the ability to force switch-ins with Encore, which is a great move with limited distribution, and Yawn. It had Counter, which Swalot is capable of utilizing due to its decent physical bulk. Swalot also packed Explosion, which could threaten Okos even with Swalot's garbage offenses. The problem is ADV has a lot of defensive poison types already. They have more utility, better stats, or an additional secondary typing that puts them above Swalot. None of them are more apparent than Muck. The stat comparison between the two is just sad. Its physical bulk and speed are identical, but Muck has even better special bulk and a respectable 105 attack, so those sludge bombs are gonna hurt. And it has Explosion, so Swalot can't even claim that. It's at least solid in Gen 3 NU. Swalot is one of the bulkiest Pokemon in the tier, and it gets a ton of value off its defensive typing, being able to switch into top threats like Bellossom, Cacturne, and it can pivot into Hitmonchan. Even with Swalot's pitiful offenses, the threat of Explosion is more than enough to keep the opponent on their toes. It's held back in the tier for being vulnerable and passive versus some key threats in the meta, mainly Metang and Haunter, especially Haunter. It's immune to both Explosion and Toxic, so for Swalot to hit this annoying Spectre, it has to give up a move slot for Shadow Ball. Well, I hope Swalot enjoyed that moment of NU viability, because it's never happening again. Muck would follow it right down in NU in Gen 4. And guess what? Muck's not even good down there. Heavy competition for poison types, a higher power level, and lots of scary psychic types. Swalot didn't really win anything from the physical special split and kind of just faded into relevancy. But he did get to purchase his first Shawama from Lonzo's Kitchen, thus finding a new passion for delicious Mediterranean food. But you know what? Gen 5 introduced hidden abilities, breathing new life to Pokemon like Politoed, who went from a bulky water nobody to Chalk, the god of rain. Perhaps Game Freak looked at Swalot and said, they gave it Gluttony. Okay. I mean, it makes sense thematically, but like, what was it gonna do with Gluttony? It doesn't really have Belly Drum or any setup options for that matter, so like, why? To make things worse, Game Freak decided to make Muck 3, and like many threequels, it's trash. Actual trash. What Garbodor lacks in bulk, it makes up for it with spikes. If you know a tiny bit about Black and White NU, that's a huge deal. The only 3 viable spinners in Black and White NU are Almaldo, Staryu, and Wartortle. They're all in C rank. Be glad that we have Great Tusk. Once hazards go up, they are never coming off. You can imagine that this is a huge hindrance to a purely defensive Pokemon with no reliable recovery. And yes, Muck is struggling too for the exact same reason. But wait, Swalot still has a shot, a gunk shot, if you will. Gen 6 introduced fairies, which were a huge deal for poison types, and it added the PU tier. A perfect new environment where the power level is just right for Swalot, and Muck's down here too. And it's one of the best Pokemon in the tier. I guess you are banished to the depths of ZU once again, while Muck gets to enjoy all its glory. Because it wouldn't last. History repeats itself in Gen 7. Muck is bad in a tier, and by proxy, Swalot doesn't favor any better. The power level keeps trickling down. The old OU staples into UU, the old UU staples into RU, the old RU staples into NU, and the old NU staples into PU. Swalot does have one teeny tiny sminy diny biny niche in the tier. Thanks to Liquid Ooze and its poison typing, Swalot is the single best counter to Victory Bell in the tier, and Victory Bell was an incredibly popular Pokemon back in Gen 7 PU. If Victory Bell were to use Strength Sap on a Swalot, it would absolutely decimate the pitcher plant. Swalot would be completely absent in Sword and Shield. But let's be honest, most of you did not check to see if it was available in Galar. Swalot would make its return in Gen 9. And what a return it was! Remember the RU staples, Florges, Salazzle, and Milotic? They're PU now. As always, if Muck is struggling to keep up, then Swalot is a crumb on the floor that was forgotten and vacuumed away. Funny enough though, Swalot was buffed this gen, and I don't mean a small participation trophy, like genuine honest-to-god buffs. Swalot received well-deserved utility options via Knockoff, Thunderwave, and Toxic Spikes, followed up by the Gen 8 edition Body Press. Theoretically, Swalot could run Acid Armor plus Body Press to snowball teams and also hit Steel types. However, without reliable recovery, Swalot wasn't gonna get far with it. Actually wait, call me crazy, but Swalot might be able to do something in OU. Poison is a very good defensive typing in the tier. There's a lot of fighting and fairy types running around, not to mention grass types like Ogerpon and Rillaboom. Swalot's the only bulky poison type that gets Encore, which, due to how much setup is in Gen 9, it's one of the best moves in the meta. Swalot's abilities aren't terrible. Sticky Hold is quite a good ability in this meta. Knockoff with Spike support is very efficient in the tier, and having a way to shut that down is invaluable for defensive teams. Muck had a small niche on stall because of that, so what's stopping Swalot from replicating the same thing? There's also Liquid Ooze, which doesn't seem like much, and it really isn't, but you could pair Swalot with Tinglu, have it click Ruination in front of Surledge or Hatterini, then you swap into Swalot and then they just fucking die. I'm really trying here. As you can tell, Swalot didn't really have a competitive career outside of its mild success in ADV NU. It's more like an intern that stayed working for the company for over 2 decades and never got a promotion. But Swalot has potential. It could be viable with just a few tweaks. We don't know if Swalot will be in Winds and Waves, but this could be an opportunity for Game Freak to make Swalot viable. In PU at least. Whatever the new mechanic Gen 10 has in store will probably not benefit Swalot at all, so we're gonna buff Swalot the old-fashioned way. Here's how I would buff Swalot. There are 3 pathways I can go. The mild route, basically the changes that seem realistic for Game Freak to make, the spicy route, which includes stat and ability changes, and the third route. This is a surprise tool that'll help us later. Disclaimer, there are a couple things I take into account when buffing Pokemon. I will try not to make them completely outshine another Pokemon. Swalot's not getting spikes because Carpador needs to put food on the table. I'll also be keeping the core identity of Swalot while improving its toolkit. Though I will be buffing it competitively, I am also taking into account the single-player experience. Pokemon like Kricketune and Furret are hot garbage because they are designed to be strong for the early game before falling off later in your journey. If they were to receive an insane boost to their stats, they'd destroy the balance of the early game. Gulpin evolves into Swalot pretty early, so for preserving game balance, I will keep Swalot's base stat total below 500 when I get to buffing its stats. So let's get started. The core issues present are that Swalot has no way to sustain itself. Having no recovery isn't a death sentence for walls. There's tons of great defensive Pokemon who don't have recovery. What they have is a mix of amazing bulk and great progress-making tools. Look at Mudsdale in Gen 9 PU. Mudsdale sets rocks, can phase targets, and could shrug off physical hits easily with stamina plus its natural bulk. You may also find that Mudsdale has quite the horsepower, with stab earthquakes, body press, and additional coverage options. Swalot is bulky, but not bulky enough to make use of the good utility options it has, nor is it strong enough to pose an immediate threat. But what if Swalot can have its cake and eat it too? My first proposal is a simple moveset buff. Recover would be more than enough to give Swalot a niche in PU, serving as a durable knock absorber that can spam knock off itself. I want to go further with this, however, because I'd also like to give it stealth rocks. Around the time dinosaurs roamed the earth, I believe it was 1968, herbivorous dinosaurs would have a tough time breaking down the leaves, so they ate rocks to aid in digestion. Rocks were Tums for dinosaurs. And so it would make sense for Swalot to have maybe eaten some rocks and then spit them out. This would grant Swalot unique roll compression and justify its slot onto teams when faced with other poison types. Or we can go my desired route. Take these 2 moves and put them on a Swalot with better stats. If I were to rebalance Swalot stats, I'd remove points in attack, then dump them into HP, defense, special attack, and special defense. With this buff, Swalot is more than capable of tanking hits it wouldn't be able to otherwise, and the additional special attack means it can pack a little bit of a punch with Sludge Bomb and Ice Beam. Now, Gluttony makes thematic sense for Swalot, and look, I love Gluttony. Billy Drumlinon is a legend. But fuck this ability! Give Swalot a real ability like Corrosion. I mean, come on, it's in the Pokedex entries. It's this Pokemon's whole gimmick. Now Swalot is finally viable in OU, and it dethroned every Pokemon ever by poisoning every single fraudulent poison and steel type in the tier. With the sole exception of Goldango, of course. Or, and I saved this for last for a reason, give this dude an evolution. Allow me to introduce you to Sir Swalot. Sir Swalot is a specially offensive tank with solid mixed bulk. I would consider giving this thing an additional typing like Fairy, Ground, or Steel, but that's how losers think. We're keeping the pure poison typing, and I'm gifting this glorious specimen Recover and Stealth Rocks. I'll also give it Flamethrower, because he gobbled up too much Ghost Pepper Sauce. The hidden ability I would hand to this specimen are as follows. Corrosion, which makes thematic sense for the evolutionary line, Filter, which would drastically improve Sir Swalot's effectiveness as a check to fairy and fighting types, or Supreme Overlord, because why the fuck not? Take notes, Game Freak, I'm cooking here. But why do I care? What drives someone to talk about Swalot on a Sunday? I like Swalot. Look at this doofus. Starting this channel really got me to appreciate some of the underappreciated, and that includes this purple squishmallow. Which brings me to the question the thumbnail posed to us. Is Swalot better than LeBron James? Yes, absolutely. LeBron could never gulp down a big fat fatty and a big fat shake and win the Fat Sal's challenge at Fat Sal's Deli like Swalot can. Now that you know the forbidden truth, what are your thoughts? Has Swalot become your new favorite Pokemon? Or are you upset that I glossed over the time Swalot got his first shawarma from Lonzo's kitchen, thus finding a new passion for delicious Mediterranean food? Well, are you? Thank you for watching, and remember,
purple is purple!
Come on! Here we go!
Purple.
How about that prick's face when he saw that?
Purple.
this
Purple.
assassin is gonna shoot.
Purple.
Purple water.